Hello, class. This is Mr. Vargas, and I am here to review the solution to the StepTracker class. This is our first practice free response. And the way I'm going to review this, I'm not just going to throw the solution up and go from top to bottom. Instead, I'm going to write the solution as if I was writing this on my own, just to demonstrate the thought process that I think you guys should be following. Also, as I work on this, I also am going to talk about the scoring and I think this will make you guys feel a little bit better because it kind of demonstrates that even if you don't know, even if you don't understand part of the free response question, you can actually get a lot of the points just by setting things up correctly or just by doing the parts you do know. And each free response traditionally has been worth 9 points. And I think, let's see over here. I have, just to give you an idea, right? Again, just to kind of encourage you to not give up when you take the exam. Um, in the past, right? This is all the free response questions that over the years. And again, this is out of 9 points. Look at the average score: 5, 4, 5, 4, 4, sometimes even 3. So if you this was a really hard year over here. But again, the exam is curved, so that doesn't really matter. But just to give you an idea, typically people only get a little bit more than half the points of this. So if you just structure this correctly, it's not even that difficult to get to around where people have gotten like the average in the past. So when you tackle these problems, don't get overwhelmed. Do what you can do. You're not expected to get 100 on it, um, or not expected, but you don't need to get 100 on it to be able to pass this. All right, so let's get started. So we're creating a StepTracker class. So right away, public class StepTracker. And actually, let me capitalize the T just to public class StepTracker. All right, so we're creating a StepTracker class. And this program, let's look at the big picture, what this program does. This is kind of like the software that would go inside of a Fitbit. When you decide to go on a new like running plan or something, or walking plan, and you set your goal for how many steps you want to walk each day, and every day that you walk that amount of steps counts as an active day, and it has a method called add daily steps, which it says it's only taken once per day. So this will be like when you go to bed and you say, all right, I'm done for the day. Add daily steps gets called. You have a method called active days. This returns the number of days that you have walked that have been active, which means that you've walked over a certain amount. And then we have average steps. This is another method. This one returns the number of steps per day. So it takes the total number of steps you've walked. So we know we need to keep track of that total number of steps walked. And it divides it by the number of days that you've walked. So, all right. So, you could go and try to do all those variables in right at the beginning. You probably could, figure it out. I'll do them as I need them. All right. First thing I want to do is I want to make the constructor. So a step tracker object is created, right? When you see the word created, they're talking about the constructor with a parameter that defines the minimum number of steps. So over here is another hint as to how the constructor should be set up. So the constructor takes in an integer, and this is the number of steps needed for the day to be active. And usually when you take in a variable, when you take in a piece of data, you're doing something with that piece of data. A lot of times you're storing it inside of a variable, or you're changing a variable by that amount. So in this case, in the constructor, we're going to be creating a new variable to store this, right? This number is the number of steps that you need in a day for that day to be active. So let's go do our constructor. So constructors are always public, the name of the class, no return type. And then, as I mentioned, this constructor needs to take in a variable. So I'm going to name it int x. The variable names don't matter. You won't get penalized for it. It might be easier for you to code if you pick more descriptive names, but I'll just leave it at x. And So we're taking this piece of data, and then we need to have a variable to designate as the minimum number of steps for the day to be active. So I'm gonna do that in a second, but before I do that, I just want to point out we got our first point, right? You get 1 point for declaring the header of your constructor. So not even doing anything with it, just declaring the header, and you got 1 point. So we already got 1 out of the 9 points. All right, let's do something with X. So I mentioned I want this is supposed to be inside a variable that stores the minimum number of steps needed for the day to be active. So let's do private int min steps. So this is an instance variable up here, right? We usually do our instance variables right at the top, and they should always be private. And this is just the type. It's an int. How do I know it's an int? Because it's right in the question, right? That's an integer right there. And steps are usually something you measure as an int, right? You don't usually take half a step. So min steps equals x. All right. So 10,000 or whatever number gets put in here, and then that gets stored in min steps. All right. And then at this point, use parameter and appropriate values to initialize instance variables. So at this point, we have 2 out of the 9 points. Yep. So we have 2 of the 9 points. All right, let's get started with our methods. So first method, add daily steps. So this method accumulates information about the steps in readings taken once per day. So add daily steps. Notice down here takes in an integer. And over here they have a comment. This is too few steps for the day to be considered active, right? Because we set min steps to 10,000. So this would be a day that doesn't count as active. Notice that add daily steps doesn't return anything. It takes in a variable, but it doesn't return anything, right? This represents an active day, okay? So if it's over min steps, then it will count as an active day. And notice we have a method called active days that returns the number of active days. So we know there's going to be a variable called active days that we're going to be increasing inside of add daily steps, but only if the number that was passed in is greater than the min steps. All right, so let's start add daily steps. So public, all right, I mentioned it doesn't return anything, so it's void. Add daily steps, and it takes in a variable, it takes in an integer, that's our daily steps. So I'm going to, so again, you can name the variable anything you want. This time I'll do something that's more descriptive. So let's call it steps, all right? So add daily steps, takes in steps, and if the steps is greater than min steps, then it will count as an active day. And you know what? I'm gonna hold off on that. I'm gonna go back to this in a little bit. At this point, we have 3. We've declared the header for this method. We have 3 out of the 9 points just for doing this part right here. And we still have to do the body of the code, but I'll go back to that in a little bit. All right, let's start the next method. So active days returns the number of active days. All right, so this is just a simple getter class. So public, all right, what's the return type? If you look down here, for active days, it returns, this time it's returning 0, 1, 2, it returns an integer. So public int active days, and it returns a variable, it returns the number of active days. We don't have a variable for that yet. So at this point, you should be like, all right, I'm gonna need that. So let me go back up here and let's create this variable. Private int active, or actually I'm gonna call it num active days. And in here, we're just gonna return num active days, okay? And that's it, we're done with this method. This method is, like I mentioned, it's just a simple getter method. And at this point, how many points do we have? Let's see. We did the constructor. We got 2 points for the constructor. We got 1 point for the header for daily steps. And we did active days. We got 4 out of the 9 points. And we hardly have done any logic just for setting things up correctly. All right. And so now let's look at the last method. Average steps. Returns the average number of steps per day, calculated by dividing the total number of steps by the number of days. All right, so the total number of steps we knew. So average steps returns it returns a number, and that number is the result of a calculation, right? The total number of steps divided by the number of days. All right, so we know we need to be keeping track of those two pieces of data in order to do this method. And let's see over here, average steps. Notice this time it's returning, it's 0.2, 0.0. So this one doesn't return an int, it returns a double. So public double average steps. And again, notice average steps doesn't take in any data. So it returns something but doesn't take in our argument. All right. So in order to return, so we're returning the total steps divided by the number of days, and that right there is your hint to the last two pieces of data you're going to need to do this program, right? Because this is the number of active days. We need another variable for just the number of total days, right? Because not every day is active. So private int num days. And then we're going to need the total steps, right? This is the minimum steps needed for the day to be active. But in order to get the average steps, we need to keep track of the total amount of steps. So private int total steps, all right? And at this point, since I already know the solution, I know this is all we're gonna need as far as variables go. But if you were, you'll see that I can implement everything else, and I don't need any other data. I have all the data I need to complete add daily steps. And really, we only have 2 more methods to code. All right, so inside of average steps, we want to return total steps divided by num days. That returns the average. But be careful, right? Total steps is an int, num days is an int, and when you divide an int by another int, the result will always be an int. And so if you did like 5 divided by 2, it would give you 2 instead of 2.5, which is what we want. So, and in fact, I think in the scoring declares returns calculated. You would not get the point for this if you made a mistake here. I'm pretty sure. Let's see, active days. No wait, average steps. Where's the average steps? Average steps method. It says responses will not earn the point if they use integer division. So this would not get the point, but this would, because now you're casting it into a double. Now be careful. This is no good. This does the division incorrectly first and then turns it into a double. That's not what you want. This does work, because this is going to take total steps. The total steps is 10,000. It turns it into 10,000.0. Then when it divides it by the number of days, since this one is a double, the result is a double. So this is what we want. All right. Now let's see. Do they have? Let's see. Calculate something other divide. Maintain. So what's interesting here is you earned a point even if you fail to handle the special case where no days are tracked. So you actually you're all set already over here. But if you actually go to run this, you'll notice that there's an error, and the error occurs when you try to calculate average steps like early on, right? When no step data has been recorded, the average step method returns 0.0. So there's a special case, right? If you try to get average steps before you've actually recorded a day, it's gonna try to divide total steps by 0. And as you guys know from math class, you can't divide a number by 0. You get an error. So there's a special case. I'm gonna do it in the solution, but as you saw from the scoring, you actually get the point even if you didn't do this. So again, on test day, if you're having some weird bug, don't just erase everything. You never know how the rubric is. If you were running this code and you notice, oh man, there's something wrong with average steps, and little did you know that the thing that's wrong with it was not even something that they were scoring you on. But I'm gonna do it. So we don't want this division to occur if num days is 0. So if num days is equal to 0, we're going to return 0.0. Now this is something I haven't done that much with you guys. You can have multiple return statements inside of a method. As soon as it encounters one return statement, it exits. Okay. So again, this handles the special case, but again, that is not even counted in the scoring. So let's look at the scoring. Let's see where we're at. We have all of our variables at this point. We got 1 point for that. We got the constructor. That's another point. We have the parameters created in the constructor. Now, you can set all of these to 0 if you want in here. Now, it automatically does that for you. And so you shouldn't have to. When I looked at the scoring over here, it says, let me see, where's the scoring notes? Use responses earn the point initialize primitive to default values when this declared will not fail to use parameters to initialize some, fail to declare instance variables initialize. Assign variables to parameters. So you should get the point even if you don't put these values in here, but I guess it's good practice to set these all to 0 in here. So num active days, let's set that to 0. Num days, let's set that to 0. Total steps, let's set that to 0. Let me hit compile. I haven't hit compile. Where's my error? Do I have an extra? Yeah, I had an extra brace. Oh, sorry, didn't delete it. Compile. All right, so no errors. All right, so average steps is done. Active days is done. My constructor is done. The only thing left to do is add daily steps. All right, so what does add daily steps do again? It accumulates information about the steps taken in per day. All right, and so whenever we take in steps, how does this affect our program? Well, first of all, total steps should go up, right? Because total steps is the total number of steps. Whether the day is active or not, total steps should go up. So total steps is equal to total steps plus steps. Yeah, total steps equals total steps plus. So whatever was in total steps plus the amount of steps taken. All right. Now, what else needs to change? The number of days should change, right? Every time you add daily steps, you've recorded another day. So num days should go up by 1. Let's just do plus plus there. And now the number of active days, this should go up, but only if the number of steps is greater than min steps. Remember, min steps is what we decided is the minimum number of days needed for the day to be active. So if steps is greater than or equal to min steps, then the number of active days should go up by 1. So num active days plus plus. And that should be it. Now because you guys are working on a computer, you technically could create a runner, and I'm gonna run this inside my runner to make sure it works properly. But really, the way they write this exam, you're not really, they don't, in a weird way, they don't want you to do that. In fact, the exam is usually written on paper. So you can't run your code. I think this is weird and I don't really like it because it's not reflective of the real world. In the real world, you can run code and see what's wrong with it. But let's just run this and so if you look at this and let's compare this to the data over here in my runner, 0, 0.0, 0, 7,000, 1, 9,002, and yep, so everything looks like it works correctly. Notice, and I mentioned this before, but the runner, I basically just copied all of this code over here, but for any code where a value is returned, you have to add a system.out.print in order to see that output. So that's it. So this is the first one, and I'm so you're gonna hopefully after watching this video, you're gonna be able to answer a few questions that I have for you, and you'll get credit for this assignment. And good luck on the next one. And we'll keep doing these until you guys either feel ready or have enough examples to give you guys a fighting chance on exam day. So have a good day, guys.